Welcome. We're at the house today, a little more casual. Figured we'd have you all over. Since this is probably where you're doing most of your watching of these videos and most of your drinking based upon these videos, we thought we might shoot one or two from the house. And so today we're going to do the 10 bottle bar for making cocktails at home. A couple of things to talk about. I've already talked about, the difference between price point and quality and what you're looking for at the bar, but the same goes at home. If you're just stocking drinks for making cocktails with, you're using different metrics than you are if you're, a bourbon aficionado and you want to find that rare esoteric find. Well, as I've said before, I know, but you're paying in that case for nuance, which is one of the things you kind of lose when you're making cocktails. So with cocktails, you're looking for quality products in each category that demonstrate that they taste true to their category. If you want to get some weird, off and left field kind of flavors of stuff, that'd be great to have, as well as something that's really true to form. If you really want like a small bar at home, that'll cover more bases. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to go through each of the 10 categories or 10 bottles, and we're going to talk about that. And there are so many gins on the market right now. It's really, really hard to choose. Well, there are a lot of different styles of gin going around. There's Genever, which is not even gin, but it's the kind of precursor of gin. It's a little rougher in style and maltier, and it's really, really interesting stuff, but it doesn't really scratch the itch that is called for when a cocktail calls for gin. So I would avoid a Genever for that context. Clearly, I'd have a bottle at home because it's delicious, but that's not the gin I would go for. We have this Durham Distillery Navy Strength that I love, and there's also kind of easy drinking starter gins. This Spanish gin, this BCN, is really, really easy to get along with. St. Augustine Distillery makes some really lovely gins. This one is finished in sweet vermouth barrels, I like. And a lot of these tend to be lower alcohol by volume or lower percentage alcohol. But if I was just going to have one gin, it would probably be Beefeater. It's in that traditional London dry style, that quintessential style of gin that we all grew up thinking, this is what gin tastes like. It tastes like juniper or pine or whatever you call it, that flavor of juniper. Tanqueray is also in that style, although a lot more aggressively juniper driven. Bombay and Bombay Sapphire are both in the style of London dry. Beefeaters is my go-to for having just a dependable gin. I've said this 1,000 times. It may not be the perfect gin for a cocktail, but it's almost never the wrong gin for a cocktail. And when you're trying to cover as much space with the same product as you can, get one that works and plays well with others. And for this case, all of these gins I like a lot, but if I'm just going to have one and I'm going to have it for the express purpose of making cocktails with, I might choose Beefeater. Rum is the next category, and we're going to fill 2 of our 10 spaces with rum. We're going to use a white rum or light rum or crystal or silver rum or whatever you want, whatever the label says, and then a darker style rum. Now there's an ocean of variety in the darker category, and we'll talk about that real quick in a minute. But first, let's start with the white rum. I use Crucian aged white. It's not my favorite white rum, but it's the one I can get. To make the point, if you're going to choose, look for one you like, but look for one also that's not going to be the hardest thing to find in your area. Not everything is distributed everywhere. We live in North Carolina, which is particularly problematic for choice in products. So we go with the Crucian aged rum because it has a little pad on it and it's actually aged. Now, classically, white rums were aged rums that they filtered the color out to kind of basically to compete with vodka, I believe. But they should have a little of that butter pad on them, a little of that barrel on them, which softens them up a little bit. It shouldn't just taste like vodka. It shouldn't just taste like ethanol. Like, it should have a softness to it. Not necessarily a sweetness, but like the taste of the sugarcane and a round softness to it. I like the Crucian, and also El Dorado makes a 3-year and a 5-year white rums that are really delicious and really great for making daiquiris. When you're thinking of a white rum, that's what you're thinking of. You're thinking of, is this going to be great in a daiquiri? And by daiquiri, clearly I mean the lime, sugar, white rum version of the drink. And that is what I would go with. Just make sure you don't have to spend the most money on a white rum, but just make sure it tastes good. Like, it may not be the most interesting thing, but it should not taste very alcohol forward. It shouldn't taste like rough. It shouldn't just taste like vodka. It should taste like rum. Okay, those are my stipulations for that. For dark rums, it all depends, because each island had its own definitive style. And depending on what style you're into, you would choose a different kind of rum. Now, the Jamaicans were famous for the black pot still rums. I like Hamilton as a brand. I think Hamilton does a really good job of covering, and his Ministry of Rum collection covers a lot of bases, and you could find what you're looking for. So if I was just gonna have two, I might have this Hamilton 151 Overproof Demerara. So this is from Guyana, and it's the classic style of Demerara rum. Now, if you make rum in Guyana now, you call it Demerara rum, whether it's in the white style of rum or whatever style you're making, aged darks. But when I say the classic meaning of the word Demerara style rum, what I'm saying is overproof or high proof black rums. So this rum from Guyana is a 151 proof, or 75.5% alcohol by volume, or ABV. It's got a lot of great flavor. It shouldn't just be hot. Remember that horrible 151 that Bacardi used to make that just tasted like gasoline? This is not that. And there are a couple of reasons to get an overproof. Now, what is overproof? Well, that's a long story, but basically if it's above about 114 proof, then it's overproof, because that was traditionally the line of proof liquor. Historically, we can get into that in another segment. But a high octane one is nice to have, but just like the rest of the spirits you're choosing from, you don't have to sacrifice flavor for proof. Get one that you like the flavor of, and if you're like, oh, it's too hot, well, if you want to taste it, put it on the rocks, or put it with a splash of water to just get the flavor and understand what you're buying, understand what you're drinking. And you can always use less. Like a good flavorful 151 like this Demerara from Hamilton, you can put a 1/4 ounce of that in a rum cocktail, and it's going to come through. Like, that's not your base spirit at that point, but like as a flavor note, it's going to come through with less. So you don't have to. You're not just getting high proof spirits to get people all lit up, but do be careful. It is high proof. So those are my two rums. I would go with a nice light rum that's great and mixable in those bright, crisp, refreshing mojitos, a daiquiri kind of cocktails. And then to bring the funk and more of those exotica, tropical, what we used to call tiki drinks, I would definitely go with something that's got some bold flavor. Tequila and Mezcal, and Agave Spirits in general, but we're only going to talk today about tequila and mezcal. For tequila, we have four styles. We have three shown here. We have the silver, or plata, which is just silver in Spanish. You'll hear some people call it blanco as well, or white. So however you want to say clear, whether it's silver or platinum, I think is one of the ones say, or white. Either way, that is a tequila that is aged about less than 60 days. And then there's reposado, which means rested. And that's tequila that's aged somewhere between 61 days and 12 months. Then there's añejo, which means aged, which is aged in barrel, a smaller format barrel, somewhere between 1 and 3 years. And then there's, not pictured here, there's extra añejo, which is aged more than 3 years and also the same kind of smaller format barrels. So if you're looking for one bottle for the bar, like if you're looking to sip on something, I might suggest an añejo. So tasty. If you're looking to make cocktails, most of them call for a silver. If you want just to introduce, if you want to cheat, you want to add just a little softness to your drink, you might want to start with a reposado. So if you're making a margarita and maybe that kind of like big tequila pop is a little too much for whomever you're serving, then just a little bit of vanillin added from just a little bit of resting in the barrel in the reposados tends to soften it a little bit, where you don't have to dumb the recipe down with orange juice or extra sugar or nonsense. You can make that perfect skinny girl margarita, which is a margarita. Everything everything they say they don't put in to make it skinny doesn't belong in a margarita anyway, as we know from our margarita segment. So if I'm going to use one at the house, I might opt for Reposado, especially just for cocktails. And you can get a decent Reposado like El Jimador for fairly cheap. If you want to up your game just a little bit, you can get Coralejo, and their Reposado and their Blanco is also delicious. And it's a little more expensive. It's not break the bank expensive, but it's also high altitude. Now, the difference in altitude, low altitude tequila, these are just generalizations, but low altitude tequila tends to be like a little less interesting and a little more like one pepper note. And high altitude tequila has a little more articulated, like herbaceousness. It has a little more like vegetal, interesting stuff going on rather than just like pepper. So depending on what you're looking for, and if you're willing to spend an extra couple of dollars, I would suggest looking for a high altitude tequila if you're getting into tequila and you want it to shine through in those cocktails, okay? Also, we can't talk about agave spirits anymore and just leave it at tequila, because Mezcal is definitely joining the party. Now, when Mezcal started being exported, really seriously exported, and I don't mean Monte Alban, I mean like actual Mezcal imported into this country in the 90s, it was Del Maguey bringing in all the single village mezcals. Now, what is the difference between mezcal and tequila? Well, they're both from Mexico. This is from the Jalisco area, and this is from the Oaxaca area, but they both can legally be made in multiple states. And I believe there's at least one or two states that overlap, meaning you could either decide to make tequila or you could decide to make mezcal. So it's the kind of areas kind of overlap like that. And tequila has to be made with 100% Weber Blue agave. So that is the only agave you can use in the manufacture of tequila. Now, they will tell you it is because it is the best flavor in agave and it is the finest agave to use, and that might be true. In the making of mezcal, you can use a lot more different styles of agave, and that can lead to more interesting variation in the category. The thing about Weber Blue agave is that it is the most efficient agave. Now, it might be they're using it just because it's the best flavor, but also you get the highest yield. It has the most sugar of any of the agaves, so you get the most yield of end result spirit using Weber Blue. So maybe it's just the flavor they're talking about, but it just so happens to be the most efficient. The second most efficient, I believe, agave is an agave that's one of the parent agaves of Weber Blue, and that's Espadin, which about 90% of all agaves are made out of, or all mezcals are made out of Espadin. Now, there are other ones. There are those single village ones. There's single varietal. There's Tobla. There's Cruces. There's a lot of different really great single varietal mezcals that are made using other kinds of agave, and those can be really, really interesting to sip on. But if I'm making a cocktail with them, I might want to stick with something that's 100% Espadin, and it's kind of made and priced, quite frankly, for mixing in cocktails. Like if it's those really interesting nuances between the mash being made of 100% of a different agave varietal than Espadin, but you're going to put it in a pretty bold flavored cocktail, you may not. That's not the best use of your money. So I would recommend either Vida or Sombra, or Fidencio makes a nice one. There's a number of easy price point mezcals available now for the express purpose of making mezcal cocktails. Another big difference historically between tequilas and mezcals is that this was made kind of in the city, and they had more money, and so they could afford these big steam ovens where they would cook the piñas, which is like the heart, the inside of the agave plant, the big kind of thing that looks like a pineapple, thus it's called the piña. It's the thing being pictured on this label here being harvested. They cut all the leaves off, and what the big piece of the fruit left, big piece of the plant, I should say, left, after you cut the leaves off is the piña. Now, they would cook these in big steam ovens to kind of extract the sugar because you make booze out of sugar. So they would do that. Whereas in the rural areas, they didn't have money for these huge, elaborate steam ovens. So they would literally cook the agaves with direct fire. So either building a big kind of bonfire-y thing and ringing the outside with agaves and just cooking them in open flame, or making a fire in a pit with stones, and then at a certain point covering it with like a damp blanket and piling on the agave and then closing it up and letting it kind of building basically an underground oven and cooking the agave like that for mezcals traditionally. So what would happen is that the smoke would get caught inside the same place as the heat. So the agave would suck up all that smoke. So when they distilled it, mezcal traditionally has a lot more like a smoky flavor to it. I mean, there are exceptions. They make mezcals now without any smoke. I don't know why. And there are also, just like they have the joven or plata or silver, and then reposado and añejo, they also have the same kind of things with mezcal. But mezcal traditionally is more about terroir. It's more about the place that you're making of it and the hand of the maker. There's a lot of different stylistic choices that mezcaleros use to make their individual products. So when you put more and more wood on those, you're kind of masking the individuality. So they haven't really caught on, and I can't say I blame people for not being interested in them. But for the bar, if you're buying these spirits for your home bar, I would stick with kind of a blended mezcal that's priced. It's probably always going to be 100% espadín and priced to make cocktails with, and I'd choose an approachable reposado that I knew I could get regularly at my local liquor store and that I liked the flavor of coming through in my margarita. We could do a whole, and we will eventually do a whole thing on bourbon, but I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Find a bourbon for cocktail making specifically that you like, that can play both sides of the line, that can come through and hold up to being the star of the show, like in a Manhattan, but also can lay back and get along with others. So I choose, I like Wild Turkey's 101. I usually drink out of full-size bottles, but I finished those. So we have this little guy right here. That was a gift. I haven't yet opened it, so before I do that, I'll probably buy another full-size bottle. Wild Turkey's 101 is just a great product. It's not break-the-bank expensive at all, but when you go to the liquor store, you will notice that it's a good 40% more expensive than the ones on the bottom shelf. It tastes good on the rocks. It's a well-made product, and if it was in a fancier bottle, you'd pay more for it. I recommend they don't ever put it in a fancier bottle. I'd rather just have good juice and cheap recycling. So Wild Turkey 101 is a high rye style of bourbon, which means it has a little more pepper. It's not a rye whiskey, it's still a bourbon, which means it's mostly corn, but it has more rye in the mash bill than traditional bourbons, or in the style of high rye bourbons. So there you go. My quick and dirty pick for a cocktail bourbon is Wild Turkey 101. For rye whiskey in that home bar, or even honestly in a craft cocktail bar, there's pretty much Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse bonded, meaning 100 proof, means a lot of other things, but the main thing you're going to take away from that is 100 proof. It's just a great, versatile rye whiskey. And if I had to just choose one, I would choose this. Once again, the flavor profile of this rye whiskey is hitting way above its price point. It's a good value. It tastes good. You could put it on the rocks and be like, yeah, this is a really good rye whiskey. And then if you were told, oh, but it's not expensive at all. Are there better rye whiskeys? Oh, hell yeah, there certainly are. There's more worse ones, however. But those better rye whiskeys, once again, are exponentially more expensive. So maybe not what you want to be putting in your cocktails or building your cocktails with. Now, I mentioned that this was 100 proof or 50% alcohol by volume. American proof is literally twice alcohol by volume. So if something is 50% alcohol by volume, then it's 100 proof. So I mention that because there's plenty of delicious spirits and especially a lot of expensive stuff that's lower. And the difference between an 80 proof whiskey, generally speaking, and a 100 proof whiskey is how much water has been added to proof it down. So 20% more of the volume in an 80 proof spirit is water versus spirit. And I have water on tap, and I have ice cubes. I can just stir around, they'll melt, there'll be water. It's great. I got plenty of water is my point. What I don't have is more booze. So I like higher proof spirits, and I can always proof them down to the desired experience. So I like to look for, especially in the whiskey category, something that's about 100 proof. So you noticed I chose Turkey's 101 for the bourbon and Rittenhouse 100 for the rye. Scotch. Now remember, before you get all like, what are you talking about? You know, single malt only. Like I get you. Like I hear you. I love Scotch. It's one of my favorite things in life. And I love the difference between a Highland and an Islay and a Speyside and a Campbelltown. Like there's so much delicious individuality in single malt Scotch. However, when we're behind the bar and we're mixing a drink, remember the criteria is it a quality product? And I would say even more importantly, if you like making drinks often, you want a consistent product. And is it not too expensive? And is it going to taste like the thing it is, right? We're not looking for some off the beaten path flavor in a cocktail. We're looking for something that tastes of itself or of its category. So I like Johnnie Walker Red Label for mixing cocktails with. Now sometimes, we'll waft a little Islay Scotch over the top to really send home the idea that there's Scotch and Scotch in there. But generally speaking, the honey and the softness and that kind of hint of sherry in the Johnnie Walkers is really good for making cocktails. And the red is just a little more aggressive than the black. The black is really delicious to drink on the rocks or just drink neat, but it doesn't really come through as boldly in a cocktail. So I like the red for if you're just going to have a bottle for making cocktails with. Aperitivo. You're going to need Aperitivo to make cocktails like Negronis, and let's face it, you're going to need to make Negronis. So whether you're a Negroni fan or a Boulevardier fan or a Spritz fan, Aperitivo is something that's important. Now, Aperitivo are generally speaking these red, gentian forward, bitter, citrus, usually orange flavored things like Aperol. Campari is probably the most famous, but most of the big Italian liqueur makers make this category as well. So whether it's Luxardo or whether it's Maletti, they're all making this category. Campari is probably the one that most resembles what people were making the cocktail with when they wrote that drink recipe down in that old cocktail book. So Campari is a useful player. I really love this Maletti because this is 25% alcohol, this is 24% alcohol, so they're really, really close. Aperol is delicious and might play really well in agave spirit cocktails because of the kind of grapefruity note it has. We've talked about that before. But at 11% alcohol, you really have to kind of adjust your recipes when you're using Aperol in place of Campari. So if you're just going to have one, Campari is going to be the easiest one to get. If you happen to have Maletti close at hand, you might choose that instead. The word Amaro means bitter in Italian because all of the Amari that you see here showcase certain bitter elements. Most of them they're compounded ideas, so there's multiple bitter elements, but some kind of lean on showcasing one particular bitter element, like these Rhabarbera is a subcategory of Amaro that feature a kind of a Chinese rhubarb that has a smoky element to it. This Cynar gets its name and demonstrates right here on the label that it's bitter with artichoke. There are plenty of other ones that just have a lot of different bitter elements in them. There is the whole category of Fernet, which ends up being a little stronger in alcohol, generally speaking, and even more bitter. And often these particular Fernets as opposed to Amaro, have a little. They're known for being mentholated, but they get their name from the use of aloe ferox. So the fer is in like iron, fernet, and so aloe ferox is kind of the default or the bitter element famously used in Fernet, the category of Fernet, and the original, the definer of the category was Fernet Branca, which is still the most famous in that category. So if you're going to choose one for your own bar, what do? Well, try to use one that isn't going to be so out in left field that it's not going to make a cocktail taste good. But also keep in mind that this is, you have to make a choice. There is no right or wrong answer, but there are certain ones that work well in a multitude of ways. They tend to be kind of softer. They're not necessarily sweet, but there's like honey notes to them. There's some darker spices. I love this Amaro Bano from Luxardo. It's really, really good for that. Moletti's really, really easy. Averna is really, really easy. My favorite, however, is the Braulio. You'll notice the kind of a way to read these labels. If you see this light blue color on an Amaro label, that means it's an Alpine Fernet, and you're going to get a little of that menthol in the back, and in this particular one, you're going to get a goodly amount of chocolate. I really love a Braulio because it has elements that I like in other Amaro, and there's just the hint of menthol, which kind of echoes a lot of the things we like about Fernet. So if I had to choose just one, it would definitely be Braulio.
Shannon, you never touched on vodka.
Oh, vodka. Yeah, you should have a vodka.